Right, let me move on to Iran, because of course you were one of the critical people looking at the money end of this historic nuclear deal. Today, one of the top stories in the Wall Street Journal, Secretary Lew, is that several U.S. firms, including Hewlett-Packard, General Electric, Apple, are exploring an entry into Iran once these sanctions are lifted. Can you sort of lay out what your expectations are in terms of when those sanctions are lifted next year, and what business might look like with Iran? I mean, you're not surprised, obviously, that so many American companies want a piece of that revenue in Iran.
So, Maria, you know, the essential agreement on nuclear issues was Iran will dismantle its ability to create a nuclear capability, nuclear weapons capability, and international and U.S. sanctions on nuclear issues will be rolled off when that happens. That is in the process of being implemented. Implementation day, which will come at the point when Iran has shut down all 4 paths to a nuclear weapon, will trigger the unwinding of nuclear sanctions. At that point, you know, there will not be the same barriers to doing business, but there will still be sanctions on things like terrorism and regional destabilization and human rights violations. So the firms you deal with obviously will matter. Companies are going to have to be clear that when they do business with entities, they're doing business with delisted entities. We will be transparent about which firms are delisted, but you know, it's going to require the firms check. You know, we have made it clear that we will keep our part of the bargain. If Iran dismantles its nuclear capabilities, we will relieve the nuclear sanctions. But we've also been clear that we don't have any illusions. Iran is continuing to do things that are quite objectionable and violate international norms. That's why the other sanctions remain in place. So it's going to require that businesses approach this with care, and we will do our very best to communicate so that there's no unwitting behavior that gets firms in trouble. But we are going to keep our part of the bargain.
Yeah, that's an important point. So you're going to be transparent to make sure companies know what they're doing so that they're not unwittingly making a mistake by doing business when, in fact, sanctions are still in place.
And they know how to check the list of designated entities, so it's not a new system. We will just be very clear in updating it and in answering questions as they come in.
It brings me to the subject of oil. We know that we're expecting oil from Iran to be coming on the market. Secretary Lew, we know that the jobs numbers are getting better. We see them every month, and we know that the economy seems to be getting a little better, if not, you know, slowly. So let me get your take on what's gone on in the oil markets. 50% decline from the highs. I guess now it's about 40% decline from the highs. And I know that that was one area of the economy where we really saw job creation. Since 2006, it was in and around the energy space where we saw so many jobs being created. Are you worried that the drop-off in oil will lead to job cuts and, you know, sort of come at a time that we're already seeing this economic recovery just gain traction?
Maria, there's no doubt that in local economies where the expansion of oil drilling activities was a source of job growth, the slowdown in activity because of lower oil prices is having an impact. But if you look overall at the economy, lower oil prices are like a tax cut. It creates more demand, more economic growth, and net, it has a positive impact on our domestic economy. I actually think that the progress we've made in our economy is substantially greater than what you've described. You look at where we were 7 years ago, the economy was in a free fall. We were losing millions of jobs. We had an unemployment rate of 10%. We had a deficit that was skyrocketing out of control. Where we are now, we're seeing steady growth. We've seen enormous job creation over this period of time. We're seeing the unemployment rate around 5%. And we're seeing that growth in spite of the fact that there's a lot of headwinds from a slower global economy. I think if you look at the U.S. economy on its own, it's doing much, much better. Now, we still have challenges. We still have questions about income distribution and access to kind of good middle-class lifestyles. We still have long-term issues beyond 10 years on the deficit. But for the next 10 years, we've brought our deficit under control. We've got growth that can keep going even when the rest of the world is slowing down. And we're in a position to take on both our domestic challenges and our international challenges. So I think the United States is in a far better place than it was 7 years ago.
So going into 2016, where would you point to as far as the growth stories in the U.S. economy right now?
You know, I think if you look at the U.S. economy, the area that has been the slowest to come back, where we're seeing signs of increasing growth and health, is housing. There's a lot of pent-up demand in housing, and I think that there is the potential for housing to surprise over the coming years to the good, because one thing I know is that people who have put off forming new households aren't going to stay in that extra room or in the shared house forever. So there's pent-up demand there. We do have a challenge to make sure there's affordable rental housing, because more and more people are renting, and we're seeing a heightened demand for affordable housing. But markets have a way of solving that, and we need policy that will deal with that.
Yeah.
I think if we need to take on our infrastructure challenge in this country. We have the best infrastructure in the world, but it won't stay that way if we don't invest in it. That's a source of good jobs for some time to come.
Yep, go ahead, Secretary.
I was going to say, I think if you look at where we ended the year, we have a good, stable platform for growth, more clarity in the tax code, more investment in infrastructure. We've reversed the kind of downward pressure, the drag coming from sequestration by having sensible cuts that are being used to restore spending that we need to invest in education and other things for the future. So I think we're ending the year going into next year well positioned.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned tax reform and certainly the issues around that. It's been such a hot-button issue from Capitol Hill to the campaign trail.